Welcome back to another week of the Let's Talk Social Innovation podcast, everybody. I hope you've had an amazing start to your week, but if not, we can kickstart it right here. I'm your host, Ian Kahine, and this week on, y'all, we got an incredible story. I got Lisa Freeman, distinguished alumnus of the University of Pittsburgh, self-proclaimed superwoman, and urban farmer. Tell them what's up.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you on. I'm very excited to share your story with everybody watching and listening.
Thank
Now,
you.
getting into this pod, we're going to be going through Lisa's backstory, what's gotten her to where she's at. We're going to talk about uh, her current work as an urban farmer. And in the second half, we'll be getting into her book release. Oh, my bad, y'all. We don't want a effing farm on our street. Now, everything else aside, let's get into your backstory. Take me from the beginning.
Well, this is going to take a while. I had a very uh, difficult childhood. I was raised in Coriopolis, Pennsylvania. And my mother, she was from the South originally, and they migrated up to Pittsburgh. And then she thought, well, Pittsburgh didn't really have too much to offer way back in the 50s, 40s, 50s. And she moved on to New York, where every Black person was migrating to the North to
Mm,
seek, better way of living. And once she got there, she became a domestic. That's what, hotel workers were called. And she ended up working at a hotel and was cleaning rooms and cleaning toilets. And then in her spare time, she was a private domestic for wealthy Jewish families. And she did their cooking, their cleaning, and took care of their children while her two children were at home. And from there on, it was just hard living. And she tried to move up the ladder of success and worked hard, worked hard, worked hard. Isn't that how we're supposed to make success, be
mm,
successful? She worked hard, worked hard. And unfortunately, her children were kind of pushed to the wayside because she wanted to provide a better living for us, a future for us. That meant that she had to work hard. And she worked 3 jobs
wow.
and we never saw her. And I, being the oldest one, I became the mother of the house to make sure my younger sister was taken care of and bossed her around and cooked and cleaned and really didn't get to see my mother much. And as time went on, my mother, as in today, sometimes when you're raising young children, you're looking for uh, a mate, a spouse, a significant other, a man to provide security for women when you're, alone and uncovered and vulnerable. And she found a man, and that man became her husband, and that man became a walking alcoholic.
Mm,
He would wake up in the morning and reach for his vodka, and his fellow men who had union workers shirt on. I don't know exactly what they were doing or what kind of job they did. They would come and get him, and they would all drive together, and they knock on the door, and 3 of them, they'd come staggering at the door with being drunk at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning with a bottle in the car so they can continue drinking on their way to work.
that's insane.
And so my mother realized she's working hard, gotten married to find security for herself. And here she married a walking alcoholic who often passed out in the front lawn or passed out on his way back from work. Definitely passed out when he got from work. We would never
Mm,
see him. He'd be passed out. So the stress of trying to work hard, provide for a family and a future, and meeting up with a man who was more of a burden than a help, she was challenged. And at that time, she had sisters, and she invited her two younger sisters to join her in New York in the state of milk and honey, and for better opportunities. And they came, and her younger sister developed cancer.
mm,
And then her mother, who was still here in Pittsburgh, she also developed cancer. And So she had a mother and a sister, both with cancer. She had an alcoholic husband who was a rock around her neck. And her sister died, her younger sister died, and that caused her a lot of grief,
Mm.
a lot of sadness. And then her mother, my grandmother, died. And I think part of that was the the rock that brought her the camel's back. It broke the camel's
The
back.
straw that broke the camel's
Straw.
back.
Thank
Yeah.
thank you. And at that point, with all the grief and then being the oldest and then not really seeking happiness, not gaining happiness, being tired, working three jobs, coming home to an alcoholic man, two deaths in her family with cancer. And then I must add that in our family, longevity was not a part of our genetic makeup.
Mm.
Everybody in my family died before 50.
Wow.
Everybody. Everybody died. So, with all of that, sickness, cancer, and the alcoholic husband, my mother started to begin to act different. And I was maybe about 10, 11 at that time. And my mother was still working three jobs. And she started to act different. And I wasn't really young enough at that time to pick up the signs. But as time went on, 12, 13, it became more evident. And she started being unkept. And she would, or her job, I think, at one time made a call. And I'm a young child at that time and advised that my mother take some time off.
Mm.
And I still didn't really understand. And she took the time off. Then she began to begin to like talk to herself. And we all do self talk.
Mm.
You know,
Internally,
yeah, we
much.
do.
Yeah.
And some people, they move their lips while they're talking, but not talking to anyone. They're just talking mentally. And she started talking to herself, but not answering herself yet. And then I noticed that she was becoming more unkept, and she was out large portion of the day. And I knew she wasn't working because they asked her to just take a moment, take a break. And then things started unraveling, and then the lights got turned off.
Mm.
And in New York, there is no like people's gas where they come and hook up a meter. You had to have oil delivered. You had to pay for that. And in New York, it's pretty brutal winters. You have to have gas. The gas went off. We couldn't pay for, or she couldn't pay. No one could pay. I'm still a child and wondering why we don't have lights and it's cold out in here. And no lights, no gas. We did have water, and she still had a sense of awareness, sort of. She went out and she bought uh, tank. What do you call those? Kerosene tank.
Yeah.
She bought a kerosene tank to heat the house. And I think she went way back to being down south. She got her cast iron pot and she started cooking on the kerosene.
Hmm.
You can actually cook. And so she would cook there occasionally. And then that was used for heating. And then eventually there was no kerosene. And if you ever try to light a kerosene and there's no kerosene inside, it
Smolders.
smolders
Yeah.
and it produces a black, thick smoke. And inside of our house, she had bought a house in the meantime, and we were living in Long Island, New York. And inside that house, with all that smoldering soot, all our walls were black.
Wow.
It looked like a dungeon. Everything was black. There was no lights, no gas, and we were sitting in black walls in darkness, no food, no adults in the house because at this time my mother had crossed over. She was totally a different person. She was walking the streets of Long Island with boots on. Back then, they weren't called Timberlands, those were just buckskin boots.
Mm.
And she would walk around with them, and her hair was undone, and she's visibly talking to someone. And she would walk around as if she was homeless all day, every day, for weeks, for months, for years. Um, and I don't know what actually happened to her husband. I don't know if they I can't even remember. Some of this stuff I've kind of like just put out of my mind and it's totally out of my conscience. But my mother went on. I'm 13 years old and we're now in school districts in Hempstead, New York. And at that time, they were horrid. They were uh, associated with crime, guns. Dominicans were really strong at that time. They were coming in. The high schools, they had guns, active guns in the courtyards,
Mm,
cruelty, drugs, drug dealing on your way to school. They didn't have buses, you had to walk. So you had to walk through projects, you had to walk through danger, you had to go to school and be in danger. Teachers really didn't want to teach, it was a job. And then I realized, I'm better just staying home.
mm,
I had a mother to take care of. I had to look after. I had my sibling to take care of. My mother had at that time adopted my cousin after her mother died. So now there's three of us in the house, and I skipped school. Or there were days when I had to make sure everything was safe. I had to make sure my younger siblings were safe. I had to make sure she didn't light the house on fire.
mm.
Uh, at the, over time, she became a risk to herself and us to do harm. She would walk around in the middle of the night and hear voices, and she would carry around a knife, a
Mm.
butcher knife, in order to protect us. These demons were starting to attack her, and in her mind, she thought they were really in the house. And we all were in one room up in the attic, and we had to lock the door to keep her from coming in the room with a knife.
That's crazy.
It was crazy, very, very crazy, very traumatic for young people to go through that. And I remember being up at night, and I'm an insomniac now because of that. I would
Mm,
stay up all night and force myself to stay up and be on watch because I was the eldest and I had to make sure nothing was going to harm us, including my mother or any other thing. And we were living in a dark, unheated house. And then my mother delved even further into depression. And at that time, there was no word for what she was exhibiting. We call it now
schizophrenia.
schizophrenia. There was no word for it back then.
Mm,
Uh, but she delved even into a darker place, and things started coming up that I didn't understand. And she would say, someone put roots on us. Have you ever heard that
I have
expression?
not heard that expression.
People from the South, during slavery, coming from Africa, there are different kind of methods of religion.
Mm,
And in some continents, they experience voodoo, witchcraft, and roots were part of that.
I see. So
And
it's like you were cursed.
yeah, I even now to this day I don't fully understand it, but it's a sort of religion that some people practice, and it's I associate it with parts of deep South witchcraft because that's where she was from. And she would go into the art cellar, and she, as part of her cleansing ritual, I guess, I don't really know, she would burn used sanitary pads.
That's nasty.
Yeah, that is nasty. And then I would smell something on fire all the way up in the attic. And she'd be down in the basement. And then oh God, we're going to go up. We're going to go up in fire. There's going to be a fire in the house. So that added more trauma to my house, to my life as a young child, maybe 12 or 13 at this time, thinking we're going to burn up in this house. And there's no one. We were in a middle class neighborhood, and our neighbors could see absolutely that there was no house lights on, there was no front light on,
Things were falling
things
apart.
were falling apart. Um, Occasionally, at this time, ambulances or police would escort her from where she was being vagrant. They, developed a history, and they would bring her home. And Ambulances uh, would bring her back home. Someone had, called and she ended up in a hospital because she disappeared for time. And things were spiraling out of control really fast. So I'm about 13 or 14 now, and my mother would disappear for long periods of time, or we would walk by her on our ways to school, and she wouldn't recognize us. And my younger sisters, they were traumatized as well and looking up to me like, what are we going to do? And we all realized there's nothing we could do, and who's going to help us. And our family from Pittsburgh, I had very religious aunt who's religious now. We all are religious. And she came. They really wouldn't listen to us. They really didn't acknowledge really what we were going through. So they drove up from Pittsburgh to see what was really going on. And they came in the house, and no lights, no gas, and smut filled the rooms. And I was telling her, like, this is really happening. And they came to plead the blood, you know, religious organizations, they do that now, to plead the blood of Jesus and to pray and anoint her with oil. And some people use holy water to combat the devil, to release the captive and set the captive free. Well, I do believe in Christianity. I am a believer, but depression is real. Insanity is real.
It's not just something that can be prayed away.
No. And the Black community has to come to terms. I think we're doing a little bit better now. Come to terms that you can be a believer and still need help. You can be a believer, and depression is real. And sometimes you need to see a medical provider. It's real. And to not acknowledge it as something that's real, you do harm to yourself. And in my mother's case, they came and prayed the devil away and left. Left us three kids.
And they thought it worked.
Yeah. And left us still sitting there in harm's way with her burning Kotex, bloody Kotex, and walking around with a knife. And that caused a deeper hurt for children to experience your family walk away. And you're crying out for help, and they came and walked away. So that caused a lot of hurt. And my younger sister, she started running away. Like, she's 10 and started running away. They were no longer going to school. How could you go to school when you couldn't wash, you couldn't dress, you couldn't keep yourself? And so we're all truant. And I'm being the oldest. I'm 13, 14, well, maybe a little older now. And by this time, I had committed my mother a few times to state hospitals or to our local mental wards, or police departments would admit her, and they would contact me like I'm the social worker, like, can she come home? I'm like, sure, she can come home, but come home to what? This is our situation. Police departments, hospitals, they knew the situation. They knew kids were in the house. They knew this woman had a mental health problem. They developed, assessments, treatments in the background, but no one came to see about us. No one came and followed up with my mother. No, there was no active treatment plan. She went, she sat there, she was 302, she did the necessary things and was released. And so I figured out early at 16, like, I'm getting the heck out of this house. Whatever it takes, I'm getting out of here. I can't take this anymore. In my mind, I've grown into a 30-year-old woman. I'm taking all this responsibility with a drunk man here, and we're stealing money out of his pockets. And then eventually, I don't know what happened. He left. And my mother, I don't know where she's at. I can't tell you until the next crisis comes and she shows up and someone's telling me or asking me, can you? I'm the one being responsible. So at 17, I graduated from high school. I did my 11th and 12th grade together, and I was there maybe 3 months. If you put all the time together, wow. 3 months out of an entire school year, I had enough fortitude to graduate a year early. And I think I must have set that record for a required number of days. Department of Education, you cannot graduate without being in attendance at the school.
They had to change the rules because of you.
I think so, because somehow or another I managed it. And I got out of that house and I moved back to my extended family here in Pittsburgh. And I was that much more uh, traumatized and angst within myself, conflicted with leaving my two young sisters there and my mother, who was out of her sorts. But I also needed my own sense of I need help, and I couldn't do it there. So I started working. I'm starting to figure out my future. What am I going to do? I had no guidance. I had no guidance counselor. I had college and whatever. And I was supporting my two young sisters from here in Pittsburgh and sending them back money, clothes, resources. And meantime, they had entered into juvenile system, foster care, or just making friends and making do.
Hmm.
Many times I had to fly back to New York because someone had called me and I had to go and commit my mother or um, go and go somewhere and release her, be there to be released unto me. And at 16, 17 years old, there was nothing I could do other than bring her back to the house. That's where, she wanted to be. And I'd fly back to Pittsburgh. So, why did I become a social worker? That had a great influence on my life. From being a young child from 10 until I left the house at 17, there were no helpers.
Hmm.
People knew the story. They knew the story of the caseworkers with my mother at the hospital, the medical professionals, the police departments who arrested her, who took her to a hospital, the social workers in my school, the teachers. There was no one who saw our need or wanted to respond. And because of that, that played a real strong influence and the basis for who I am today.
So, closing that book on your childhood, did you ever hold it against your mother adopting your cousin and having that be your responsibility?
I didn't hold it against my mother. I just felt like the thing is, to me, is that I became an overachiever. I'm
Hmm.
a I'm a overachiever. I had to compensate for all of that. I had to, my self esteem was, there was no self esteem. I felt like I had to do that much more to be seen. Even on in life, it just followed me. Like I couldn't go and get one degree; I had to get two.
Hmm.
I had to be super special because I'm dirty. I'm less than. I had to live this way and I had to hide. So, in order to make me equal to everybody else, I had to be better. So, I didn't hold it against her because I saw the devastation of her mind, what she was going through. But it did affect me by having to just earn it so much or feel like I had to do that much better to earn some sense of being human, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
So, looking back in hindsight, you lost your childhood or what
Yeah.
should have been your childhood because you had to take care of your siblings. You had to commit your mother to mental institutions instead of making friends, playing with people, having a regular childhood. In terms of forming who you are today, is there anything that you change about how you were raised?
Um, how I was raised developed the strength in who I am, unfortunately. And every negative event going forward also played a role in forming who I am. If I had to change anything, I don't know what it would look like because that's all I knew.
Hmm.
So you can't miss anything you never had. If I had a better childhood, um, I don't think I would appreciate life as much. I would definitely not understand struggle life. Maybe that would be great. I didn't know how to struggle, but it paid off it now into adulthood. I know how to struggle. Everything doesn't have to be rosy. I know how to make things happen. I know how to maintain it and come out on the other side. Where if I didn't have the struggle at a young age, I'd be struggling now.
Mm, that's deep. So moving out of New York, going into school at Pittsburgh, getting two majors, 2 degrees, masters of social work, an MPA. Through that entire journey, what did you learn that you want to pass on to everybody watching and listening?
What did I pass? What do I? Well, let's go back to being an overachiever. I came to the University of Pitt and the opportunity to have a dual degree opened up while I was here. So taking advantage of opportunity is one. Being a Black woman coming here, I thought I needed that much more, and that stemmed from childhood. I had to be an overachiever in order to get a job. For me, I'm also the first generation going to college, and I had not seen that in my family either. So there was no one there to model that. I knew my models are Barbara Jordan and Shirley Caesar. Those were my role models. I wanted to be just like them. And I wanted to make a significant impact. I thought they were the best orators and thinkers and brilliant Black women. And I thought, in order to do that, I have to be as strong. The mistake I made was I came back to college, or started college late at 30. I didn't get to experience the college experience at all.
Mm-hmm.
Sororities, clubs,
Non-traditional.
non-traditional. So I didn't really appreciate all of it, all that it could offer. And when I went to college, it was yet another struggle because I had a young daughter. So that was struggle again. It wasn't enjoyable. It was struggle. And then when I graduated with 2 degrees, I thought I was on my way to department, U.S. a federal job, US.gov, making 6 figures. Wrong. As a Black woman with 2 advanced degrees, I have never, ever made any salary over $40,000.
Wow.
I was now at another risk because when I interviewed, people thought she's overqualified. She's going to only stay here for a while and then she's going to take my job.
Mm.
And going into social work, the majority of people who are leading social work are white people, white women, oftentimes. So I was a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere I went, I was a threat. She's overqualified, or she doesn't have experience coming into social work. And everywhere I go, I keep hitting this roadblock. It's been a struggle all along. I would say to this younger generation that I'm seeing now, uh, you are more than enough. You are more than enough. You are more than enough. I remember as a younger person, do what you love and the money will follow.
Mm.
That is so true. It is true. You have the power within you. Go deep and look into yourself and figure out who am I and what do I want. It's just that simple. You might need education or you might need classes in different areas. Do that. But you're more than enough.
It's good to hear that because I feel like the common message to my generation now is that everybody should pursue STEM. That's where the money is. You want to do art, you want to do political science, you should stay away from that. Why not be an engineer? Why not, get into med school? Because that's where the money's at. But hearing the perspective of someone who's been through that already, saying that what I am interested in, it's fine to be interested in that. It's fine to pursue that. That's inspiring.
Oh, absolutely. You've got all those innate abilities. It's in your DNA. It's already there. You just got to find it. Do what you love, and the money will find you. It's just natural attraction. Do what you love.
I'm taking that to heart.
Truly.
Now, in between the time in between where you are now in urban farming and graduating from the University of Pittsburgh, what followed in between those two areas of your life? I'm sorry, I'm just getting caught up with myself.
No, that's all right. So after I graduated, and I wanted to do the extreme work, I wanted to go into the trenches. I wanted to go. The young Lisa, came back up and like, this is why I got into social work. I wanted to find those young Lisas out there who are not seen. I wanted to find the young Lisas who are crying for help, but no one's looking. Those young kids who are, acting out of sorts, doing outrageous things, those are cries for help. But no one's really paying attention, or they're just bad. Look at them; they're unredeemable. Those are cries for help, and no one's really paying attention. If you see all of us and we're all flagging our hands, you just think, oh, that group, such and such, they're just bad eggs. They're just, look how they act. It's people who've been traumatized. It's people who are desperate. It's people who are hurting and they don't know how to get the appropriate attention. So they're doing whatever it takes, the outrageousness to get somebody's attention. Those were the opportunities that I were looking for. So after I graduated, or even before I graduated, my internships were the hardest places where no one else wanted to be. I was with Weed and Seed, where they're in Aliquippa, where Aliquippa was a devastated town when the mills closed. I was with City Housing up in the hill when, before they started rebuilding, and the hill was rough. Mm-hmm. And City Housing and doing work in child welfare. I was with places no one else wanted to be. And I was in community organizing. I didn't go into private practice trying to make those six digits, being, driving a Beamer. I wanted to really, really help. So after I graduated, I ended up getting a job with a mental health organization in Braddock. And originally, it was for drugs, smoking cessation, a prevention project to help people stop smoking. And then they realized, oh my God, she's a Black woman and she's strong. And like, oh, we're going to switch her around. And I started doing things like crisis prevention in Braddock. And that became my territory. And we're doing counseling on, they're shooting every day, morning, noon, and night, shooting up grandma's house. So I kind of transitioned to this project, and our mission was to address the homicide rate in Braddock. And at that time, it was murder capital of Allegheny County. Wow. That's where all the shooting was going. Like, we've got to address that. And I was a young social worker just coming out of college, and I'm here and I'm thinking, now, how am I going to stop people from killing each other? And I was part of a community I was a community organizer, and I had to develop a coalition of area providers to address homicide and how we need to come together rather than working in silos, and come together and address why people are shooting. How do we stop this? And using your piece of expertise, how we're going to develop a plan. And at that time, when I entered Braddock, there was a young man who was not quite out of Harvard, but relatively new. And he was about 7 feet tall, and he had hair at that time, and he had tattoos on his fingers, 15104. And they told me, oh, you should go see him. Tell us what you think about him. He's a little odd. And I'm like, oh, okay. Trying to get all my members together. And I went to his office, and the walls were painted psychedelic. Oh no, the walls were painted glow in the dark black. And he had some coloring that was like psychedelic print on the walls.
Quite a character.
And I'm like, oh, they sent me to see him. Well, now I understand why. They tell us what you think about him. Well, that man that I went to see, he had just been voted in as mayor of Braddock. And that's our now Senator John Fetterman.
Yep.
So I had the privilege of working with John Fetterman, and it was quite an experience developing that coalition, watching John Fetterman, how he actually worked, and getting to know him and his love for Braddock. He was definitely committed. And I grew under the involvement of many nonprofits, the people. I became immersed in that community. People thought I lived there because I went to every church there. I was like a member of every church there, every event that they had. I ate at people's houses and we talked about different things. We organized trips to Washington. We marched, we planned, we ate, we fussed, we uh, got the plan together. And then 4 years later, the homicide rate in Braddock had went down. We had addressed it somehow, and I don't think it's ever returned back to that state it was at that time. So we won, and I came out unscathed. And then that kind of transitioned, and I moved on to other things.
So, being on the front lines of crisis prevention as a social worker, back then, that was completely unprecedented, completely unheard of. So nowadays, we send out social workers with police officers going to crisis scenes as a means of de escalating the coming trauma.
Sure.
How did you feel being a trailblazer of what we now know is common today?
I don't know if I was a trailblazer because people were out in the community. They weren't doing, I won't say that level of grunt work or being in the trenches, but there were people who were working in the community. They were forming those coalitions, talking, coming together, but addressing people who are ready to jump off the bridge and don't do that, put the guns down, or little, I don't want to get too, but there were little black girls who were getting raped in the alleys.
Mm.
It was horrible in Braddock. The devastation when that mill closed, and what was left. It was something, but there were other people making changes. And my mentor, Tracy Soska, he was a great mentor. My professor at that time, he was working in the field and bringing about change, but it might have looked a bit different. But there were people already doing it.
So, moving into urban farming, how did you get your feet in that?
Well, I had gotten sick of I was at burnout level with after all of this. I went to other nonprofits and it was just challenge after challenge after challenge, but that was the path I chose. I worked with people who didn't want help. I worked with communities that were most at risk. And people say, what does that mean? Most at risk for failure, most at risk for violence, most at risk for being I don't want to say this, animalistic, because there is the poverty was so real. When you get desperate, you do desperate things. And those were the clients that I work with, the neighborhoods I worked in. And after a while, it's burnout level. And I remember talking to, I'm sorry, I'm getting that age now. Names aren't coming to me, but
Please.
he used to be the executive director of the United Way, and I'm going to be at home all day thinking about his name. And I reached out to him and I'm like, I need a mentor doing this level of work. There is no one who can help me. I can't recharge. There's no one doing this level and I can't recharge and I need some help. And it wasn't a therapist that I needed. It was like my soul was depleted.
Mm.
I had given everything I could and like I just need somebody to breathe life into me. And he heard me, but he's an executive director, and he really heard me, and he talked to me a few times via email, but there was never once that I could recharge off of or replenish my emptiness. So I kind of started moving away, but I didn't realize I was moving away. I started doing something, playing in the dirt is what I called it. But it was community organizing. I was working for a school. Well, I wasn't working for a school. We moved to the city of Pittsburgh. I bought a house that was condemned. After coming and going through college, I felt that my children had sacrificed while I went from community college all the way to graduate school for took me 7 straight years, and I thought my kids deserve something uh, since went without. We were in poverty that whole time. Like, we deserve to live in a Cosby house. We deserve to move. We deserve to have more. And I bought a house through the city of Pittsburgh in Manchester, and it was condemned. And it had police tape all around it. And it was a 3-story Victorian. And I bought it through the city. And it was on the most historic street in the nation, on Liverpool Street. And people thought, oh my God, she bought that house. I'm like, what did I do? I was so embarrassed. I never would go by there during the day. I would sneak by at night and make sure it didn't catch on fire or anything.
Mhm.
And it took me a few years after graduate school to get my finances back together to become credit worthy. And I did, and got the house back together. And my children moved into the house. I'm like, you guys deserve to live in a Cosby house, 3-story Victorian, and amongst Black people, so you can understand who your race is. We were in another community out in the suburbs, and we didn't get the Black experience, the fullness of it. So we moved here in the city, and we had a culture shock. We weren't used to hearing gunshots.
Mm.
I'm like, what's going on? And nobody would flinch. I'm like, what's that sound? I had never heard gunshots, never. And then we were introduced to Pittsburgh Public School District. And I didn't understand the hierarchy, the different levels. And where we were from, you went to school based on where you lived. There were neighborhood schools. And I quickly understood that neighborhood schools meant something different here in the city.
Mm.
And I went to that neighborhood school, and they had metal detectors, they had security, they had drug dogs, they had school police. I'm like, what in the world is going on here? You got to go through a metal detector in order to get into the building. And I'm like, no, my son's not going here.
It's not treating children like children.
No, it's like lockdown.
Mm.
And when they say pipeline to prison,
that's it.
that's it. You're used to going through security. That's the first visual experience. You develop that mentality as soon as you walk in. You might think it's for security reasons, but should a school have to turn into lockdown? That's the pipeline to prison. That's the beginning. That's that unconsciousness that you experience when you walk into a building. So eventually, my son did not go there. He went somewhere, and the principal reached out to me, and she said, "Miss Freeman, I promise you, if you let your son enroll your son here, I promise you he'll be okay." And for some reason, I trusted her, and he did go to school that year. And then once I got there, another strange phenomenon happened, and I'm thinking, okay, where you join the PTA? And there wasn't a PTA. It hadn't been a PTA for years. Like, it was unheard of. When you were in the suburbs, there were PTA mothers who drove that traditional minivan. They'd line up. You had to pay to join. That was an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
It was a given that you became a parent of the PTA. And there wasn't one in our school. And it was strange to me. There's no PTA, really, no PTA. And I went in there and I started. And the principal said, there's somebody else here who I think would make a good member. And he became my husband, Wallace Sapp. And so he was already in the school mentoring all the children. He was like a grandpa figure, and all the kids knew him. And when my son started there, he took to my son because my son is on the autism spectrum, and the kids saw my son, who was taller than all of them, but they knew instantly that we have fresh meat here. He's not from the hood.
Mm-hmm.
And they started picking on him and chasing him. And my son, like I said, it was a culture shock. We didn't have that kind of environment. And Mr. Wallace started protecting my son, mentoring my son, keeping him a watchful eye on my son. So he had developed a relationship with my son before I even had known him. And we went on from there, and we ended up getting married. And we were the only PTA parents, him and I, for years. And while we were there, I discovered sort of a love of playing in the dirt. And it was just to soothe my mind. And then I developed a community school garden in partnership with the school as part of the PTA to develop a program. My husband developed a school based program, and it was called Math Doctors. In Mr. Lecky's third grade class, he developed his own math to teach the children how to do math. And it became an evidence based. It was ruled that, yeah, the kids are getting, they understand it this way. So he did school based and I did community based. And that was our farm, our little garden. And the kids, I wanted the kids to have something that was non uh, threatening, that was non competitive, and to give them a sense of nurturing something from beginning to end because the kids were violent.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them grew up in close projects and could see the devastation of byproducts of living in poverty with domestic violence and domestic violence, gun violence, drug dealing, and then fights would break out and then bring it back to school. So they were aggressive, and I'm like, okay, let's teach them something. And it started blossoming, and the kids like, wow, and they were really getting into it, like, oh, Miss Freeman, look at this. And it was right outside the school, and my house was also right outside the school, so I would take care of it. And right outside the school was also the basketball courts, and I would walk by the basketball courts with my garbage can of mulch and my Jamaican hair with the dreads,
Mm-hmm.
and the drug dealers there, and they would see me coming and going. And I'd spend hours out there, and they'd kind of watch from a distance. And I remember one day, in particular, I'm really sweaty and probably smelly, looking like a bag lady myself, and then going to get the next batch of mulch from my backyard. And they're waiting for me to walk right in front of them so they can laugh.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look at her. And I got right up to them and I said, oh, wait, y'all been watching me all this time and I'm old enough to be your mother. Which one of y'all gonna help me? And they got shocked and they were surprised. I'm like, what did she just say? Like, I'm old enough to be your mother. Which one of y'all gonna help me?
Hmm.
And the one jumped up and he said, yes, ma'am. I'm like, oh my God, when they call you ma'am, I'm like, I'm in. Yes, ma'am. And he went right, took the garbage can that had wheels, rolled it to my house. And as soon as we stepped away, I could hear them laughing. And I turned back, like, don't laugh, because we'll be back and you're gonna be next. And so from that day, a relationship developed with the drug boys. I call them the drug boys, the drug dealers, the boys with the hoodies on. They had certain uh, t-shirts. They all looked alike. And a friendship developed. Well, I'll say a friendship, a mutual respect developed. And they'd watch me, and on hot days, they'd just watch at a distance. And I'm like, y'all ain't doing nothing. Go get the hose. Hold this hose. Water the plants. You ain't doing nothing else. And they came and they would water the plants. And then I realized I'm not hearing all that boom, 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 that bass going on. I'm not smelling that weed, because they had this unspoken thing when that woman, that Jamaican woman or the Rasta ladies there, like, I'm a man, don't be doing that in front of her.
Mm-hmm.
They start respecting me. And I kind of like saw it, and it slowly, the drug trade moved. So it wasn't at the playground anymore. Like, Miss Lisa's out here and she's doing this, she's working with kids. Don't be doing that out here. It was one of the most blessed uh, feelings I've had, to have that kind of silent influence where, I'm calling them drug boys. That can be seen as very derogatory, but that's just my name. Like, we look at them and we think, they're up to no good. They're selling drugs. Look at them. They're on a corner. They got a corner, but these are young men who are redeemable. They have things, skills, and dreams and desires. Somewhere along the way, they were failed, and I saw it firsthand in my son's school. They graduate, don't know how to read, don't know how to write, don't know how to count money. What kind of job can you get?
Mm-hmm.
they have redeeming qualities, but again, they've been waving their hands looking like, help me. You see, I'm doing these outrageous things and no one's trying to help me. Or politicians have promised them things,
And
job
they don't
service,
deliver.
and they don't deliver. Or this program is meant for you, but they only want the best of the best. They don't want the problem. So, like, yeah, they didn't work for me because, like, I wasn't what they like. But I found the redeeming qualities. They're human like everyone else, and they have a role to play in every community.
That's community building at the basic level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it should be inclusive. We should not walk by a child wherever and not acknowledge that child, even with the hoodies on. It's like their hoodies on, they don't really want to be seen. I think in my mind, as an older person, that's why they're wearing a hoodie. I don't really want to, or no one's used to seeing me. No one ever talks to me, so I'll just wear the hoodie. Acknowledge them. Look them in the face, walk by and say hi. Acknowledge them because they are part of the community fabric and they play a role. We just often don't accept it. But if you give them an opportunity, they can play a role very successfully, but they're not given enough opportunity.
I feel as though this is a good time for us to get into this week's artist spotlight before we get into talking about your book in this second half.
Okay.
This week's artist spotlight, I'll be playing Slow Down by Clay Coast for y'all. I hope y'all enjoy.
So you're feeling like a ghost, like you got no say. Your life is riding on coast, you're on your feet all day. So you're feeling out of place, like you're all alone. Life's a never-ending race, and while you're running's unknown. Well, life has got its lemons, but you gotta find the sweet. Find what makes you happy and then play it on repeat. Make your vision getting blurry and your patience wearing thin. Life is overwhelming and your head begins to spin. I say, just slow down, slow down. No delay, just slow down, slow down.
Hope y'all enjoyed this week's artist spotlight. That's a snippet from Clay Coast, their song Slow Down. Their artist description and Instagram will be linked in the description of this video or audio, however you're watching or listening. Now, getting into the second half of this week's episode, we're going to be talking about Lisa Freeman's newly released book, We Don't Want an Effing Farm on Our Street. I've had the pleasure of being able to read this book over the last month or so. I'd say that it's quite thought provoking in the way that it links redlining, zoning laws, discriminatory practices with how we can flip these things into building strong communities and getting back what was taken from us. Now, Miss Freeman, I'm gonna let you do the talking about what you want our audience to know about your book and what they can expect to get from it.
I started this book just based on that title. We don't want a effing farm on our street. After I had bought a building, another opportunity that was a condemned building from the city of Pittsburgh because I wanted to own my own property where I could farm and not have rules. Because when I had initially started the school and community garden, that was city property that the city agreed for us to use for the school. I had another farm, another garden, and it was beautiful and it was like an art feature. It was very, very unique and beautiful. But again, it was owned on property by the URA and government officials. I decided I wanted my own land. I could make my own rules. And I saw this building and it did a slow rot in the community, and everybody was afraid to touch the building. And I went and bought it from the city of Pittsburgh. And people thought, why did you spend? I think I spent almost $10,000 for that building. And it's a huge building. It's over 11,000 square feet for the city for a plot that size. It's big. To have that much space in the city of Pittsburgh is incredible. But it had a building and it was a warehouse. It had a bakery. It had many functions in there, but it did a slow rot and it had decayed and it was condemned. And I thought, like, how people were wondering, like, how is she going to do something? Like, who is she? She doesn't have the money. Well, I figured out how to. It was couldn't be redeemed. It could not be restored. So I had to tear the whole building down. And because I'm a social worker and I just know all the ins and outs and all the people, I figured out a way to take the building down, and it cost me exactly zero, where people were giving me estimates of $60,000, $70,000 to demolish the building. Working in partnership with another nonprofit agency, they came out and thought it was a work experience, and that agency was Job Corps. And I want to also make note that people who don't realize, people who work for nonprofits or government agencies, they almost all have a mission that they have to give back to the community. They serve the community. So when you're looking for resources, don't fail to reach out. They're looking for opportunities, and you'd be surprised just by asking. So always put that in your toolbox. So I tore down the building, and then it became prime. Developers started, like, I could probably build 8 houses on my lot, and people were after me. They were suing me maliciously and just for that's another story. You can be sued for any reason. Know that also. That was a lesson learned. It doesn't have to be common sense. It doesn't have to sound reasonable, something a prudent person would think was crazy. People can sue you for literally anything. And especially people in community development, they know how to run a clock and a clock out. And they'll sue you just for nonsense. You wouldn't even think it's a reason. Anybody in their right mind wouldn't pay no attention to that. But they have schemes. So, like, there are ways people can sue you and take your property. So if you're ever sued, take it seriously, because there are ways people can take your property. And this person actually said that to me. We don't want to effing farm on our block. And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't ask you what you wanted. And I'm thinking, secondly, I don't need your permission because I own my own property. And then who is we? I'm part of we. I'm an owner on that block. So who is we? And I wanted to break all that down, because bullies, people can oppose you or call you names. Sticks and stones might break my bones, but names will never harm you. But people in power, or people who think they are in power, they can't work in isolation. It has to turn into a we. And they have to form a lynch mob. They have to form a gathering against you. It has to become a we in order for them to give them a bigger voice against you. One individual. People have to understand, when you have difficulties, you should talk it out, person to person. Talk it out.
Not through the courts.
Not through the courts. Work out your own problem. But when there's a power dynamic, or people think they have a power dynamic, and you challenge that dynamic, that's where problems come in. When I'm a person, I'm not going to back down. And that person thought they had a power that I rule you. I rule this whole community. What I say goes. And Black people, that's how it started in the book with redlining. We've been conditioned in our mind, like powers that be came in and tore out our communities. They tore all our communities down, traditionally Black communities. All the businesses were tore down. Um, that's why they're economically devastated. They came in, they tore it down. And then after that, redlining, you couldn't move. You couldn't get a mortgage in certain, just walk into a community and buy a house or rent an apartment. That's what redlining means. There's only certain areas that Black people could move to, or people of color. It wasn't all out, go to Monroeville, Highland Park, or wherever. I'm just using those for example. You can pick up and you could take your family and move anywhere. That was part of segregation. You were corralled as Black people. You could not pass go. And so you have to stay in this area, ghettos, and you got to make it do. So they tore down housing, they tore down all your businesses, they tore down all your livelihood, they tore down community pride, they tore down children, relationships, and schools, and a sense of community. So you're all left to kind of fend for yourself. And then they built bridges, and they went through those same communities again to separate them, put a center down to further isolate you. So when this person told me we don't want this in our community, something triggered in my mind. Like, who are you talking to? Are you talking to me? And that was the first premise in that book. We all have power. We all have power. And people have to understand first that you have power. We all have power. You might not realize it because you haven't exercised it, but we all have power. And people can only do, say, or push against you as much as you allow them. We all have power, and we have to ignite that power, that sense of power within us. Unfortunately, in Black communities, we become apathetic because people have been doing things to us. We have been corralled and do not pass go and take away all your sense of pride, tear down all your businesses where Black kids can't see people who are upwardly advancing. Black people, Black children can't see another Black person making it. So we have no examples. But we have power. And oftentimes now what's happening is and particularly in my case, big developers are coming in because they're getting big perks, they're getting big money, they're getting big kickback, they're getting big resources and all kind of assets to help them come in and redo another type of urban redevelopment, another type of uh, opportunity funds, and they're welcome with open arms. But oftentimes they associate themselves or align with depressed communities, economically depressed communities, and we're going to come in, we're going to make everything right for you, we're going to do this, and give you jobs and whatever. But we need to use your economic status. That's what opens the key to us to getting to all these perks, to all these benefits. And we want to meet with you. And they came in and set up a community meeting. And God is my witness. This is a real, true story. They came in, hosted a meeting, and the meeting was delayed. It was packed. And because they advertised refreshments. And what kind of refreshments did they have? They had the best hot, steaming hot fried chicken you can ever imagine. Oh, and they had macaroni and cheese. They had collard greens, all the traditional kind of food that Black people
They
like to
know
eat.
how to attract a nigga.
Oh, we was there. I was there. And I'm like, look, it's packed now. And you all fell for the rope-a-dope. Ah, and because in Black communities, and this is another little secret, they want you to sign your signature on the sign-in sheet to not memorialize you, not really to get your, well, they'll use your information, sort of, but on the sign-in sheet, they'll use it as if so-and-so is here, so they agree with this.
They're fine with us taking away
Yes.
the community.
So that tells you we had the community involved, and it's in essence a yes because they attended this meeting. So and so was here, and they liked the idea because they came. Well, they came and they took the low income where they're abutting our neighborhood. And yes, we're low income, we're marginally depressed, and we're going to come and we're going to rescue you. We're going to create this Ferris wheel to make it a tourist trap. We're going to put these upscale uh, stores in, fine dining, fine shopping, or restaurants, and no community benefits. None to us. None. There's no community benefits agreement. None.
It's solely to create capital.
Right. You look at the Hill as a model with the pins and all that reinvestment they're doing. They have a community development agreement. Nothing goes on without meeting with that group.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. In our neighborhood, no.
Not
No
everyone's
community.
smart enough to unionize that way.
Oh, they're smart enough. Those very people who said not, we don't want to F, they chose not to. Come on in, have your way. Slip us something, help. We'll just do what we do.
Mm.
No agreement with this community. Like, oh, okay, we understand. We have an unwritten agreement, perhaps. Yeah, plant some trees. Give us a better infrastructure. Give us a bike path. We'll be happy with that. But meanwhile, they're developing a tourist trap. And I forget how much the numbers keep changing. Was it 90 million, 40 million? Like, that's going to soon become a gated community. And we're going to put a certain number of affordable housing in there, in your upscale housing. So you might have 4 units out of your 100 to give to grandma. She's no threat. We'll let grandma live here, and
The rest
that'll
of y'all
meet.
are gone.
Yeah, that meets our obligations back to this community. Is that fair? Is that just? And someone said, well, we need a grocery store in here, and that's the part that I heard. And they responded, oh yeah, we'll build a Trader Joe's. We'll put a Trader Joe's in here. And that's the part that inspired me and made me a little upset. Like, I've been growing and giving things away. And I'm here with a commercial greenhouse. And it would be okay. And Trader Joe, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong at all. But I'm here and I've been doing the work. And why can't I have an opportunity? And I started raising my own money, my own funds, and told my story, and people believed it. And significant funding started coming in, and money attracts money. Once I could say that USDA gave me a $175,000 grant because they heard my story and believed I could, well, then another 100,000 came in. I'm like, oh yeah, we're supporting Miss Lisa. Another whatever came in.
Success is attractive.
Yeah. And people like, this is a real compelling story. She made an argument, and the building is just about done. I'm like, look, you didn't want to effing farm on your street, but people are screaming now with the cost of food prices. We're screaming now about the reality of climate change. We're want to know who our farmer is. We don't want all these chemicals and toxicity in what we're eating and pesticides. I'm right here. And what about the Black community? There are no Black businesses, none.
Don't fight the solution.
There are no Black businesses. Like, Miss Lisa's here, and since we've been building, we have hired from the community. We have had Black men out from in the community working, and people, the young men and one man, he spent 20 years in federal prison, and he's been first and foremost smiling every day, like, I want to get back. He does it anyway. He's getting paid, and he's first and foremost smiling every morning. Young Black men coming like, yeah, we know where you're from. How did you make the change? You're giving back to the community. And now there's a tangible item in the community that you have built. You've had your hands in it. And that sense of Black pride, it's coming. And that sense of like, let's wake up from this. We do have a voice. Like, we're so used to things happening to us without having a voice in the change, or being able to say no, or being part of the process. Like, it's been like real eye opening to me. And especially, like, there is no community benefit for our community. No a number of minority workers, not a certain amount of minorities supported business, nothing. So they owe us nothing, but you're going to come and take advantage, and they owe us nothing. And there is no one to speak on our behalf. That's the kind of reality where I really want Black people to know that we do have equal opportunity. You just have to make up your mind that you want to see something different, and you be the change you want to see. You can do it. You're all that you have everything that you need.
It's beautiful. So, with the time that we have left, I think there's one question that I'll ask you from your book. So, chapter 3 of this book is titled Not in My Backyard, which you shortened down to NIMBY. The theme of the chapter is how we can turn NIMBYs into YIMBYs. Yes, in my backyard. Could you describe how we can go about that process to the people watching and listening to this?
You have to understand that everybody has power. There are people, I'm building that, and still people don't even realize what's going on. They don't come that far down in the neighborhood because I'm traditionally in the other side of the neighborhood, nothing's happening. So just being the first, I understand. Well, I have been made aware that there's another young, brilliant Black woman who has just down the street from me bought 3 abandoned buildings that are condemned. She just bought them and she's getting ready to build. So to think that that's inspired, it'll be a build back the block kind of a moment where other Black people are taking notice and like, yeah, I want to do something too. I do have a right to make change. You don't have to leave it to the individual powers that be. They only have a certain amount of power and the power that you give them. They can't take any more than what you give them. I forgot the question. I was getting all worked up with that.
We're turning NIMBYs into
NIMBYs. So NIMBYs, I'll call it like this. You call it being gentrified. And I'm going to use that term, being gentrification. And in Manchester, we're seeing houses going for 3-bedroom houses going for $500,000, $500,000. Nothing outstanding. We have houses that are beautiful, Victorian, that look like museums inside. So it won't be anything. It won't be too far where we'll have homes going for $1 million. And that's because the suburbs are now wanting to come back to the city core, and those communities right outside the cultural district, walking district, all the amenities that the city has to offer, the inner city communities. And so most people associate that with gentrification. And in my mind, there's 4 levels of gentrification. I won't go through that. Most gentrification that most people talk about is when white people come into a community, don't acknowledge the Black people there, or don't speak, walk right by you, don't speak, and look down on Black people. And Black people who suffered all the violence, all the gangs, all that, when it was in renewal and the redlining, they've been there all through that time. And for people to come in and reap the benefits.
They take the fruits of their labor.
They take the fruits of their labor. So they look at it that way. But if people who are coming into a historically Black community, which is now changing to a mixed community, I would say you have to come in with your eyes open. You don't come in with any rights to seem like we're going to take over and we have to assimilate to what your standards are. We're building a community and each person has a role to play in it. White people generally attend meetings because they're just wired that way. They want to be in the know. They want to be involved. Or Black people have been pushed out of meetings. Things have been happening to us, and it's almost like we're not welcomed. And so when neighborhood plans start happening or discussions being held, white people would probably say, why don't Black people come to I've heard that before. Why don't Black people come to this meeting? There are reasons why Black people don't come to meetings, because we've been done to often enough. We've been taken advantage of many times. It's unbelievable. We've been lied to many, many times, where we just don't believe anything anybody has to say because we've been conditioned. It's just a lie. White people going into community, you have to be aware that, oh, well, I can't just speak on what matters to me. And that's a right sentiment. But think about the whole neighborhood in a whole. There are Black people there. Ask the question, where are the Black people at? Ask the question, you're like, well, there's Black homeowners here. I know Lisa. Do you know Lisa? She's doing here. Like, why isn't she at this meeting? Why hasn't she been invited? Like, why don't you have regular? And I just got this meeting today. Why don't you hold regularly scheduled meetings? It's hit or miss. We don't even know who's on your board.
Mm-hmm.
These are your community leaders. They're holding power and holding power captive. If people understand this is a mixed community, then there should be mixed meetings. Something as simple as that. Not in my backyard. Get to know your Black neighbors, get to know your white neighbors, get to know the value that we each give each other. Not in my backyard. It's not your backyard. It's our backyard. What matters to you, Lisa? Well, what matters to you, Jane? Like, oh, well, here, have some strawberry and I'll take your whatever. It's a commerce. We're exchanging. And neighbors should be that way. It shouldn't be competing like, oh, keep them down there. I don't want to speak to them. I just want to walk my dog and poop in your yard, disrespect my yard. No, we're neighbors. We don't do that. Understand me and I'll understand you. Did that answer that? We have to acknowledge each other.
That did answer that very well. Now, for everybody watching and listening, you will be able to find the link to this book, the Amazon link, for if you want to get the ebook or the paperback. The link will be in the description of this episode. If you've enjoyed the conversation that me and Lisa have had, then this book is definitely for you. Now, in terms of upcoming events with this book, you did say that you have a book signing coming up this week.
I have a book signing coming up the last Friday in February. And I chose February because it's Black History Month. The last Friday in February, I think it's the 26th, I'm thinking, it's from 5 to 7 at Emerald City, downtown. So come on out. Please join us. We want a lively discussion, and I'll be having some refreshments. And I look forward to meeting you.
So, like I said, the Amazon link will be in the description. The link to the Freeman Family Farm website will also be in the description. Now, this has been an incredible episode. I really just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for making it out here so that we can have a great discussion. This is your host, Ian Kahinde. Have an amazing rest of your week, and we are signing off. Peace out, everybody.
Thank you.